Good morning, Bellwood. It's good to be with you. Now, I wish I could actually be with you, and I'm looking forward to next week when I'll actually be in your presence, but it's good to connect with you like this. Last week we started a series focusing on and looking at the book of Leviticus as we anticipate and we look forward to Easter coming in this next month. We are anticipating these weeks leading up to Easter, looking through the book of Leviticus, and that one question that came to mind was, how can the King of the universe dwell with his people? This holy King that is good, that is true, how can he dwell among us and among his people that are not? Now, in Leviticus sought to answer that question. And we looked at the context of Leviticus as God provided a way for the Israelite people to dwell with their king, or their king to dwell with them. Now, we know, and we look forward to Easter, we celebrate Easter because we know that ultimately Jesus is God dwelling with us, making a way for us to dwell with him. And I gave that analogy last week with the acorn and the oak tree, and how all of these things from the Old Testament, whether it is rules and stipulations, or it's even characters and events and things that we find in the Old Testament, they are like an acorn. They are foreshadowing something greater that's going to happen. They are just a seed that is planted, and that seed will grow and grow and grow. And ultimately, we see in Jesus that oak tree, that mighty oak that we can look to and lean on and find shade under. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Now, we see that Jesus is the fulfillment of all these things, even by his own words. When Jesus is on the cross, there are 7 sayings that are recorded throughout the Gospels that Jesus says from the cross. Now, one of the last things that comes from the mouth of Jesus on the cross is this simple phrase, "It is finished." It is finished. Literally, it's done. It's completed. It's all tied up. It's all like, this is the end, right? And that could be a reference to the end of his life is finished. But we know also that we look at his mission is finished and it is accomplished in that moment. And even greater than that, we know that all of these things from the Old Testament, all that stuff that we've been looking at here, and all those stories that we know, and all those, we talk about rules and stipulations, but even characters and events, all those things are pointing toward, foreshadowing, and leading to Jesus in his mission, in his life, and his ministry. And it's at that point he knows that it's finished. It's fulfilled. Now, let me give you another analogy. Let's picture it like this. In the Old Testament, let's picture that like all of the Old Testament characters, whether they're prophets or these events like the Passover lamb and all these things that we find throughout the Old Testament, imagine that they are like a table, and they're setting the table, right? They're putting the plates and the forks and the knives, and they're putting things how they should with the, all the forks on the correct side. And my wife still has to tell me what side to put them on, but they're putting them all in place, the glasses, and they're putting them there, right? And as Jesus enters into the picture, what we find is that he begins to fill those plates. He begins to put fill the dishes. He begins to even take, really what we see Jesus doing is it's like taking a glass and filling it with water, right? He's filling it all the way from the bottom and all the way to not just halfway full, but Jesus is taking this glass and he is filling it all the way to the brim. And so we see that through his life and his ministry and his death and his resurrection, that Jesus is fulfilling and completing these things, literally filling these things to the fullest. Because he even said he didn't come to abolish the law. He didn't come to get rid of it. He came to fulfill it. And that is a beautiful thing. And that is what we are looking at here in this series, Offering, as we look specifically at the 5 offerings that the Israelite people are directed to bring, or how they are directed to bring these things in the temple or at the tabernacle at the time. And we are going to look at how these specific offerings are fulfilled in the person of Jesus, in his life, in his ministry, his death and resurrection. And we're going to take a step further, and we're going to answer the question, if Jesus has fulfilled all these things, right? If all these things were pointing to him, and he came and he ministered and he healed and he taught and he died for our sins and he rose from the dead. Well, the question is, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? After we go, if we get to that point and everything is done, where do we go from now? Let's start by getting into the first two offerings that we're going to read about today. We'll read about one, I'm going to talk about it, we'll read about the second one and get there. So if you have your Bibles, open them to Leviticus chapter 1. Some of you probably did your homework and read Leviticus 1 and 2. Perhaps next time I'll have a quiz over the homework. Today, you lucked out. Okay, so let's read this. I'm just going to read the first 9 verses of chapter 1 of Leviticus to help us introduce what's going on here, right? We talked to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring it as your offering an animal of either the herd or the flock." Verse 3, "If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you're to offer the male without defect. You must present it at the entrance of the tent of meeting so that it will be acceptable to the Lord. You're to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. You are to slaughter the young bull before the Lord, and then Aaron's sons and the priests shall bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar at the entrance to the tent of meeting. You are to skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron the priest are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Then Aaron's sons the priests shall arrange the pieces, including the head and the fat and the wood that is burning on the altar. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water, and the priest is to burn all of it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord." Now, when we look at this requirement here, we look at how God lays this out for Moses, we see this is a specific gift that is given by the people here. And if we read on, we'll read here, this first one talks about from the herd. The second one, it talks about if you give from the flock. And the last one, or the flock of sheep or goats. The last one is if you give a bird of some kind. Now, whether it's an ox, a bull, or it is a ram that you give, or if it is a bird, a pigeon, a dove of some kind, those do not represent like values of gifts, whether one is better than the other. What those do is give an opportunity for the different, you could say, economic status of the giver. Some people cannot afford a bull. They don't have those in their livestock. They don't have rams in their livestock. That's not their livelihood. But some people do. That's how they make their living. And some people, those are the different degrees in their economic status. But regardless of their economic status, there's opportunity for them to give. There's opportunity for them to give because what they're giving is they're giving their best. They're giving the best of what they have. The description in here that we read is that they are a male and they are unblemished, right? So this is a strong animal and it is unblemished, meaning it doesn't have spots anywhere. It doesn't have any broken bones. It doesn't have any deformities. This is one of the best out of your flock, the best that you have of the herd or the flock, whatever it is, and that is what you are offering to the priest here to take, and you slaughter the animal and they bring it and they put it on the altar and they burn it up. Now, the process for this, right? So we know that we're giving the best. The process for what they do, we read about there, kind of graphic, I understand, right? They're skinning the animal, taking out the parts, burning it all. But what they see here is that the entire thing is consumed. The entire animal, right? It's not like medium rare. It's not whatever. It's not like they're taking parts of it. They burn up the entire thing until it is completely gone. And so what we see here is that they are giving their best. They are giving the best of their herd, the best of their flock. They are bringing this gift. Remember, we talked about the word offering. They are approaching the altar with the best that they have, and it is being burned completely. It is completely gone. And what we see here is the focus of this gift, the focus of this gift. And that focus is surrender. Surrender. They are taking the best of what they have and they are laying it down and giving it to the priest. And this is a gift that can actually be given often. This is a gift that is available for them to give daily, and it's a voluntary gift. This is not actually a required gift. This is a voluntary gift that they bring and they offer to them. Because here with this gift, that's what we see the gift is, but the purpose of this gift, the result of this gift, like the reason that they give their best, the reason that they surrender this is so that, as it describes here, it is an atonement for unintentional sin. An atonement for unintentional sin. Now, when we talk about unintentional sin, what we're talking about is, we know that there is something that separates us from God. We know from the very beginning that sin entered in and it affects how we interact and we react with one another. We know that it affects how we understand things and how we do things and what we do to other people. And sometimes we like when we look at sin, there's a sinful act. We do something that hurts somebody else. We do something that's against God's law. And that sinful act is a sin. We commit that sin. And that's intentional sometimes. Because we feel it, we do it. That's how we operate. Now sometimes though, our sinning is unintentional, right? We don't mean to do it, but there's something in us, this bent toward sin and self-service that just leads us toward that act. And that is because of that general sinfulness that consumes us and directs how we operate. This is, if you remember reading the story of Job, when you read the story of Job, he was a righteous man, right? He was a good man. He was upright in all ways, and he had all of these kids. Now, one of the things it says about his children is that they like to have parties at their house. Now, it doesn't say that they sinned in their parties. It doesn't say that they did bad things. It doesn't say that they did all this. But Job, because he was a righteous man, because he was a good man, and because he thought maybe they had sinned, maybe there's something that they did, because he knows kids, he knows humans, he knows how they operate, he knows that maybe they did something. It says that he regularly offered sacrifices just in case his children sinned. And that's what we're talking about here, is this general sinfulness, right? This kind of offering this for those unintentional sins. And what it is it's an atonement for those sins. An atonement for those sins. J. Sklar, when he describes this act in the book of Leviticus, and he describes atonement, he says it's like a dual purpose. He describes it as a dual purpose. He says that it's a ransom for the giver, but also there's an element of purity that's worked with atonement. Right? When we atone for sins, and there's this atonement that happens in this act and even in the act of Jesus, we see that it is both a ransom and for purification. Right? A ransom is when you pay an amount of money to release somebody from something. Really? Whether it's from, they're held in bondage, they're held in prison, they're held wherever they are, but they are, this ransom is paid so that they are released. And so in the same way, the giver here is giving their offering, giving their best. They're surrendering this so that they may be ransomed. They may be released from that guilt, from that shame of their sin, and they may approach God. They may approach the King of the universe. And so there's that side of atonement. The other side is this purification piece, because sin covers us. Sin is in our heart, as Jeremiah says. It's etched in the tablet of our heart. And so when we see, we come to God with unclean hands. We come to him not purified. We come to him with the guilt and the shame of sin. But when we offer, they offered this gift in the Old Testament. They gave this, that splashing of the blood, the burning of the animal, took away that guilt, took away that shame, took away that filth that covered them. That sinfulness that consumed them. And so there was both that ransom and purification. Ransom and purification, because this goes down to the question, how can the King of the universe dwell among his people? Well, here we see in their surrender, he ransoms them and he purifies them. He ransoms them and he purifies them. And so he pays that ransom so that they may be released from the bondage of sin. And he purifies them so that they can dwell with that holy God. So beautiful. And even in this first gift that we see and we look at here. Now, another element that's very important Another element that's very important in here. It's described a little bit there we see in chapter 1, but if you read chapter 6, you actually will begin to read more of a focus on the part that the priests play and what they do in these acts. Now, the fire itself that's on that altar, right? The altar itself is huge. It's a ginormous altar. It's huge. And when they offer these gifts, there is a fire that is on there. Now, it's not just the people of Israel that have to offer their gifts. The priests need to be purified as well. And so when we read in chapter 6 and we read in some of the other chapters, even as far back as Exodus, when we read through there, we read some of the things that the priests have to do in order to purify themselves. And they have to offer their gifts in the morning before everybody gets there. And even in the evening, they'll continue to offer gifts. And if it's going in the morning and the evening, that fire that's on the altar, that fire that's there needs to be lit and needs to be ablaze constantly. Needs to be ablaze constantly. And so that fire that is on the altar, that fire that is consuming all of these gifts completely, that fire that's there needs to be lit all the time. And that fire being lit all the time is representing the faithfulness of the people as their prayers are rising to God, as their sacrifices are given to God. We see that fire is continually lit as a sign of their faithfulness to their king, their faithfulness to their God. And so we see that the gift is the best. They are surrendering their best gift. God is atoning for their sins with this gift and through this gift, ransoming and paying the ransom and purifying them, because God is focused on that relationship there that he can build with his people. And that fire is it's nonstop, constantly burning. Now, the second gift, the second offering that we're going to talk about today is in chapter 2. And it's closely tied to this first one. I mean, if we're going to have meat at a dinner, we got to have bread too, right? If you're going to bring this gift of this bull or, from the flock or whatever it is, if you're going to bring this gift of meat and it's going to be consumed, we got to have bread too. In fact, in the Israelite mind, when we looked at sacrifice, we look at sacrificial worship and the system like this, we look at this, they very much looked at it as a meal setting, like they're sitting at a table. They're sitting down with God, and this is the food that they bring. This is what they offer, and they can sit and they can dwell with the king. And so meat and bread go hand in hand. And so the second offering we have, the first one is called the burnt offering, right? Because it's completely consumed. The second gift that we look at, the second offering that they give, is the grain offering. Now, I'm going to read about the first one, just like I did in Leviticus 1. You can continue to read the rest, but I'm going to highlight some of the points. But go ahead and join me in Leviticus chapter 2. It says this. It says, when anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, their offering is to be of the finest flour. They're to pour olive oil on it, put incense in it, and take it to Aaron's sons, the priest. Now the priest shall take a handful of the flour and oil together with all the incense and burn it as a memorial portion on the altar, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons. It is a most holy part of the food offerings presented to the Lord. Now, when we look at this, there are, even though they are giving grain in any different form, there are actually 5 different forms, if you read through the chapter, 5 different forms that they can give. They can simply bring the flour that they have and offer it. Now, you saw and you read as we were going through that some of it is thrown on the altar and burned, but some of it is actually kept for the priests. And there are only a couple offerings where the priests get to partake in what's going on, but that is a gift to the Levites, so they can sustain their families and they can live on, right, as the priests live in the Levitical line. But it's also an offering to God's chosen people, the Levites, and a gift that way as well. But we see here they could just give flour, right? They give the portion of flour that's required. They could also bake it into cakes, right? So they kind of bake it into a cake. They'll cook it in their pot. Kind of looks like pizza dough to us. And there are different forms that the cakes can take. They can cook it in a griddle. They can cook it on a pot. They can cook different ways. And the last one, so there are 5 different, but the last one, they just take the grain heads and they crush them. So it's not necessarily like processed flour. It's not made into the flour, but it is the grain offering that is given to them. Now, in every instance, no matter what form the grain takes, whether it's flour or just crushed heads or even baked into cakes, Some of it is burned completely, and some of it is given to the priests. And in all of them, there are some requirements about what is included and not included. In all of them, what is not included is yeast. Now, it's not included in this. Yeast is a rising agent. Now, we know that yeast is left out of the bread when they left Exodus. When they had to leave in haste, they had to leave. They couldn't give it time to rise anyway, so they left the yeast out. And we know that the things that are given holy to God, set apart for God's purpose, many times after that do not have the yeast in them. It's symbolic of God's provision, taking them out of Egypt. It's symbolic of giving what is good to God. In fact, later on, you'll see it even from the mouth of Jesus. He'll use yeast as a metaphor for bad things. So when we put those bad things in, they can kind of affect what's going on there and it'll grow. He says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, right? They can kind of get in there, it's subtle, it's small, but it can have a big impact later on. So none of the gifts have yeast. None of the offerings, whatever form it is. Now, what they do include are a few other things, right? They include oil. Now, oil helps bind the flour together if you're going to bake a cake, right? It'll also kind of help preserve those things. And then you also add incense. Now, this could be frankincense, this could be anything else, but this is what gives it that beautiful smell. This is what gives it that sweet aroma as it burns and raises up to God and kind of symbolizes their prayers to Him, symbolizes that beautiful gift that they're giving to Him, that incense that burns and goes up. Now, one thing that's also included in these, and they don't talk about it till the end of the chapter, it says right here in verses 12 and 13, it says, you can bring them to the Lord as an offering of the first fruits. They're not to be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma. Season all your grain offerings, it says. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all of your offerings. Now, the purpose of this offering is the same as the burnt offering. The purpose behind it, to atone for, and it goes along with the atonement for unintentional sin. But we see these added things and added elements of the grain offering that make it a little bit different, right? Anytime grain is involved, anytime grain is included, there's this focus on provision. Right? When we talk about produce, we talk about grain, we talk about anything they grow in the field that they offer to God. It's as if it's a thank you for what He has provided. It's showing, God, you have provided this. I'm going to provide it and give a portion back to you, the first fruits that are there. And so we see that element of gratefulness for the provision of God. But we also see this added salt that's put into this gift. Now, that salt we know works as a preserver, but also like a flavor enhancer, right? We know that when Jesus says you're the salt of the earth, we know that it's that same thing, that it not only enhances the flavor perhaps of the bread, but it also helps preserve the fire as it's being lit, okay? And so what we see here is that salt. He refers to it as the salt of the covenant. The salt of the covenant. Now, this represents for the people their dedication to the promises of God, their dedication to following the laws of God, their dedication to following God Himself. And so we see the offer of surrender, giving their best, but we also see this dedication to their God in this gift. So surrender and dedication, two things that reveal and open that relationship between God and His people. So the King of the universe can sit and dwell among His people. In this burnt offering, we begin to see it, and in this grain offering that are given together by these Israelites. Now, how does Jesus fulfill the things that we've read here in Leviticus 1 and Leviticus 2? Now, I know many of you are already you're drawing comparisons. Many of you are already there. You're thinking, oh, I know some of these, or I could take the quiz right now. And some of you are ready to answer this. But let's take it slow. Let's start with the basics, right? The basics of the burnt offering is that they bring a male that's unblemished. And so we know Jesus, being this man that taught in Galilee, we know that of His sinlessness. We know that He did nothing to hurt anybody. We know that he did not sin as He was on the earth. So He was in the same way that the goats and the bulls that were brought were unblemished. We know that Jesus Himself is untainted by sin, untouched by it, and he himself is unblemished. And we also know that Jesus, in his agony, in his death, was completely consumed. Completely. We see his agony as he is the night before praying, talking with God about his will being done. We know that he's sweating drops of blood, and so we see him being consumed by the sinfulness of man and the mission that he was to go through. And we know that his body was broken for us and given for us in that same way. Now, looking at the grain offering, we also can draw the parallel of provision. Right? Jesus in John chapters 6, 7, and 8, we see the feeding of the 5,000, and Jesus in chapter 6 says, I am the bread of life. He talks about how he is the bread of life, and we partake in him. We eat from him, and he is that bread that sustains us. Just as God provided Moses the manna in the desert, the same way the bread from heaven that is Jesus came down to provide for us. So we see that parallel and that fulfillment of, you saw this manna, you saw this bread, this grain offering that you give, that acorn, right? It's that cup that's set there. Well, Jesus fills that cup and says, I am the bread of life. I am your provision. I am how God is providing for you, not just your day to day, but on into eternity. On into eternity. Ultimately, we know that when Jesus offers his life on the cross, that when he gives himself on the cross, that he gives himself as an atoning sacrifice for our sin, for our general sinfulness. We know that he gives his life as an atonement, both as a ransom to pay for us to be released from sin, released from the effects of sin, released from death even itself, as we see him raised from the dead and rise from the dead. We know that Jesus gives his life as a ransom for us. And we also know that it is for our purification from sin, so that we may live a life here to the fullest, as Jesus says, right? That we live a life here to the fullest, on in to eternity. Now, the writer of Hebrews is constantly showing how the Old Testament is fulfilled in the person of Jesus. And what we see over and over and over again is all of these people and these characters and events, and the writer of Hebrews continues to say, well, you saw that, well, Jesus is better, right? You saw Moses, Jesus is better. You saw angels, well, Jesus is better. You saw the Sabbath, Jesus is better. And it ultimately comes down to the high priest. The high priest is the one, right, on the Day of Atonement that would go into the presence of God as they atone for the sins of all of the people. And we see here that he points out that Jesus is a greater high priest. In Hebrews chapter 10, I'm going to read just these first 10 verses here, just to give us a picture of how the Hebrew writer ties all of that Old Testament imagery and character and the sacrificial system into what Jesus does for all of us. Hebrews 10, 1 through 10. It says, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming. A shadow, an acorn, a cup being folded. You could pick your metaphor. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices, repeatedly, endlessly, year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. Looking, none of these things that they did could bring them and make them perfect. If they had to do it over and over and over again, it was not making them perfect. It was not completing what was going on. Otherwise, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshipers would have been cleansed once for all and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, here I am. It is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, my God. First he said, sacrifices and offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not desire, nor were you pleased with them, though you were offered in accordance with the law. Then he said, here I am. I have come to do your will. He sets aside the first to establish the second, and by that will we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. This gift that God gives in his Son. Not only was Jesus the high priest, but he was the one that offered the gift. He was also the gift that was offered. He was also the gift that was offered, that unblemished gift to atone for our sinfulness. Once for all is how the Hebrew writer puts it. Once for all time, once for all people. And the intent to atone for our sin, a ransom and a purification, so that we may dwell with the King of the universe. So that we may dwell. He offered his greatest gift, his most precious gift. He surrendered him and dedicated him for our ransom, our purification, and our atonement. And that is how Jesus fulfilled those things from the Old Testament. He fulfilled those things all the way to the top, where it's completely filled. Now, here's that question I told you I was going to ask. If Jesus has fulfilled all these things, if he's done this thing, if he's filled that cup all the way, if he's grown to a mature oak tree and he is that oak tree, if he's made all of these things complete and perfect, what do we do now? Where do we go from now? What do we do? To help us look into that question, to answer that question, turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. If you've read through Romans, and if you have not, I encourage you to read all the way through Romans. It may be as thick as Leviticus in some of the theology that you read, but it is the most concise, beginning to end plan of God's salvation for the world. You could almost entitle the book of Romans, How God Saved the World. That's what he's talking about, is salvation of the people, of all people, Jews and Gentiles alike, and God's plan from the very beginning, culminating with Jesus and coming to and pointing to and ultimately showing itself in the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And he lays out all of the events, all these things that happened from beginning of the world to now, and how we fell in our sinfulness, and he provided a way to make peace with God. And Jesus is that person that we look to. He's that new Adam that comes to recreate the world so that we may dwell with our King. And he looks at how he gave the gift. He talks about how the gift was given, and that is Jesus Christ. And God, in his mercy, though we were sinners, sent his Son to die for us. Now, this is how he begins chapter 12. This is how Paul begins chapter 12. He says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy." In view of God's mercy, taking into consideration all of the things that God has done to save you, all of the things that he has done in order to ransom you, to purify you, to atone for your sins, the giving of his Son, the offering of his greatest gift, his unblemished, begotten Son, for your sins, that sacrifice for you. In view of that mercy, in view of that gift, what does he call us to do? What does he call us to do? He says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. He says two things. Offer your bodies. Offer who you are. Offer all of who you are, right? In the Old Testament, God says, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength. And Jesus, when he talks, he says, the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. This is your whole person, how you think, how you interact, how you act, how you react, who you talk to, the kindness that you show. All of these things are all of us. And Paul says to offer our lives, offer our bodies, offer these things. He says, surrender who you are. Surrender all of these things because of what God has done. Because he has already offered that gift, you can come empty-handed. Because he gave of his Son, you can come without the gift because he has already given it. Just offer your life. Give your intentions to him. Give your attention to him. Give him your time. Give him your love, your focus, your heart. Give him all of these things. He says to offer your life wholly in this sacrifice. But he also says offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. As a living sacrifice. Now, this idea of a living sacrifice not only shows the surrender of what we are offering our bodies, offering our lives, offering who all we are in that surrender, but also as a living sacrifice, it is a decision we make every day to dedicate ourselves to who God has called us to be. It is a dedication of ourselves to his service and to who he is. That is what worship is. We get a picture of it in the Old Testament. Get a picture of it in the Old Testament and how God says, here is your way to dwell with the King of the universe. This is your way to be with me. And this is your way to atone for the general sinfulness, atone for the sins that you have committed. Here is a way for you to follow. And in fact, he not only tells us the way, he gives us the way, Jesus, and offers that sacrifice in our place and for us. So we don't have to bring bulls, we don't have to bring rams, we don't have to bring birds, we don't have to bring anything to offer to him. He has given the gift. And so he says, now offer yourselves surrender as a living sacrifice, dedication. The surrender and dedication we see in the burnt offering and in the grain offering, we see in the surrender and the dedication of Jesus, and now he calls us to a life. After we have accepted this gift, after we live under this gift, and this gift ransoms us and takes us and purifies us, we now live in surrender and in dedication to God. That is our worship. Our worship is a reaction to. See, in the Old Testament, they had to give the gift in order to be ransomed. They had to give the gift in order to. They had to offer the worship in order to step into that covenant, to go toward those things, to dwell with the king. Well, the king says, now I'm dwelling with you and I have made a way. Now your reaction is offering that sacrifice. Now your reaction, your worship is living a life dedicated to me. Your worship and your reaction are giving surrender and dedication to your King. So I invite you this morning. I invite you, if you haven't surrendered your life to Jesus, because of that gift that he has given, if you haven't surrendered to him, my invitation is that you do it now. Is that you look at how God has worked, not just in your life, but the life of those around you, and through this book, and we've seen how he set those ways to be with him, and he made the way to be with him. And he gave the way to be with him. That you look at God's mercy. You look at God's grace. And in view of God's mercy, in view of God's grace, you surrender your life to Jesus. That you give your heart to him. And if you've given your heart to him, if you have surrendered your life to Jesus, my other invitation is that you dedicate your days to him. You dedicate your life. Every day you wake up. If you have to write a reminder, set an alarm on your phone, you wake up and you say, God, today is yours. You step out of bed and you pray, God, today is yours. I'm going to live as a living sacrifice for you. See, that's the problem with the living sacrifice sometimes, is it can crawl off the altar. Today, every day we have to decide, we have to say, your ways are our ways. God, may your will be done in my life. Give me today my daily bread so that I can walk in your will each and every day. It is through surrender and dedication that we are able to dwell with the King of the universe. Pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you. Thank you for making a way. Thank you for offering your greatest gift, surrendering your Son, so that we may come empty-handed. Thank you for dedicating your Son and your will to be with us. May we, in reaction, in return, in our worship, dedicate our lives to you. Father, it's in your name we pray, and we thank you so much. Amen.